He trusted him like family. He drained her retirement without blinking. But what he didn't know, this grandma had a plan and a lawyer. Now the same son-in-law who once flexed in luxury suits is paying her rent every month, just to keep a roof over his head. From betrayal and broken trust to eviction notices and exposed scandals, this isn't your average family drama. It's a savage senior comeback. One bold move at a time, she took back her life and made him pay. Literally. You won't believe how it ends. Like, share, and subscribe for the twist. Grace Whitman had never imagined retirement could be so sweet. At 72, her days were filled with early morning walks, gardening, and tea with her best friend Nora. Her tidy bungalow in the sleepy town of Meadowbrook had become her sanctuary after decades of teaching English at the local high school. Grace had always lived modestly but wisely. Her savings account, built up from a lifetime of penny pinching, was her pride and her safety net. Her daughter, Amelia, visited occasionally with her husband Brandon, who always seemed too smooth, too polished for Grace's liking. Brandon was a financial advisor, or so he claimed, who'd risen fast and talked faster. Grace could never quite put her finger on it, but there was something unsettling about him. Still, for Amelia's sake, Grace kept her reservations to herself. She didn't want to seem like the interfering mother-in-law. After all, Amelia looked happy, didn't she? One spring morning, Grace received a call that would slowly begin to unravel her peaceful life. Amelia's voice trembled with excitement. "Mom, Brandon has this amazing investment opportunity. He thinks you could really benefit from it. You've always said you wanted to leave a little nest egg for the grandkids, right?" Grace hesitated. It wasn't like her to hand over control of her money. But Amelia's words tugged at her heart. She trusted her daughter. And if Brandon really could help her make her savings grow for the grandkids, maybe it was worth considering. "All right," Grace said, more to Amelia than to Brandon. "Let's talk about it." And just like that, the door opened. Brandon knew how to charm. He had a smile that could melt ice, a wardrobe straight from a magazine, and a way of making people feel like the smartest person in the room, until they weren't. When he came over to Grace's house, he didn't talk like a son-in-law. He talked like a Wall Street guru giving a TED Talk. Diversification, portfolio growth, minimal risk, he explained while showing slides on his tablet. Grace listened politely, though most of it flew over her head. Still, Amelia beamed with pride every time Brandon made a point. "Isn't he brilliant, Mom?" she asked. "He's been doing this for years." Brandon made it sound simple. He would take over the management of her portfolio, just a small part of it, and reinvest it in more promising ventures. She'd still have access. Total transparency. Nothing to worry about. "You can track everything right here," he said, handing her a folder of documents and a login to an online dashboard. Grace looked at the screen and nodded, though she had no idea what she was seeing. Against her better judgment, she agreed to let Brandon manage a portion of her retirement savings. What she didn't realize was that the folder he handed her was full of complex jargon and fine print that gave him near total control. Over the next few months, Brandon regularly reported to her with updates. "Your investments are performing well. We've had a small dip, but that's expected. Trust me, we're in it for the long haul." And Grace, ever trusting, did. Until things started disappearing. It started small. A few hundred here. A couple of unexpected withdrawals there. Grace thought maybe she had forgotten about some scheduled payments. Or maybe there was a clerical error at the bank. But then she noticed the overdraft notice. That had never happened before. She logged into her bank account. The interface was confusing, but something was off. The balance was significantly lower than it had been just 2 months ago. Thousands of dollars were gone. Not transferred. Gone. Panicked, she called Brandon. "Oh, Grace," he said smoothly. "That's just movement between accounts. Perfectly normal. I can explain everything at dinner tomorrow. No need to worry." But Grace did worry. She printed out statements, highlighted withdrawals she didn't recognize, and began comparing them to the investment reports Brandon had sent her. None of it matched. She waited until dinner the next day. Brandon arrived with wine and flowers. His charm offensive was in full force. "So let's go over those numbers," Grace said, skipping the small talk. Brandon gave her a practiced smile. "Grace, I know it can be hard to understand these financial systems. That's why you have me. Trust me, Everything's fine. Grace insisted. Brandon's tone cooled. Look, if you don't trust me, maybe you shouldn't be investing at all. That was the first crack. Later that night, she found her old savings ledger, a worn notebook she'd kept for decades. Page after page of neat records tracking every penny. She compared it to her current finances. Nearly $80,000 was unaccounted for. Grace didn't sleep that night. She sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by papers, bank statements, and Brandon's spreadsheets. It didn't add up. The money she had worked her whole life to save, gone. Stolen. By someone she welcomed into her family. He wanted to scream, cry, throw something, but instead she sat in silence. The next morning, she tried to talk to Amelia. Her daughter's reaction was lukewarm. Mom, Brandon said you misunderstood. He's a professional. You don't understand how these things work. Grace's heart broke. Amelia wasn't just dismissive, she was defensive. Loyal to the man who had robbed her mother blind. That night, Grace called Nora, her oldest friend, the one who always listened. Come over, Nora said immediately. Over tea and cookies, Grace poured it all out. Every suspicion, every bank statement, every lie. When she was done, Nora leaned back and said the one thing Grace hadn't expected. You need a lawyer. But I don't have money for lawyers, Grace whispered. Nora smiled. Remember Jennifer Hastings? That girl you mentored? She's a lawyer now. Very good. And she owes you big time. And just like that, Grace saw a glimmer of light at the end of her despair. Jennifer Hastings hadn't seen Grace in over 20 years. But when she got the call, she didn't hesitate. She arrived 2 days later, briefcase in hand, no nonsense in heels. Mrs. Whitman, she said with a warm hug. I've been waiting for a chance to repay you. They sat down at the dining table, the same one where Grace once graded essays. This time they spread out legal documents. Grace showed her everything. Jennifer took notes, cross-referenced accounts, and her expression hardened. This isn't bad judgment, she said. It's calculated theft. And if what you've told me is accurate, we can take him to court. But that won't get your money back immediately. Grace nodded. What else can we do? Jennifer smiled. We get creative. They spent hours planning. Emails. Powers of attorney. Digital forensics. Grace felt like she was in a spy movie. Jennifer set up a new account for Grace and began the process of cutting Brandon off from every legal tie. She helped Grace revoke every financial permission she had once handed over, quietly so Brandon wouldn't catch on. Then Jennifer said something Grace hadn't expected. We're going to flip the script, but we'll need to be patient. Grace, for the first time in weeks, smiled. She wasn't broken. She was just getting started. The tension in Grace's house had shifted. It was no longer a quiet resentment tucked into corners and under polite smiles. There was a sharpness to her tone, a confidence in her eyes that hadn't been there in months. Even Brandon, absorbed in his own ego, started noticing the change. Dinner that evening was unusually formal. Grace had prepared her signature roast chicken, the one Brandon always devoured without a word of thanks. The table was set with the good china, the kind Grace usually saved for holidays. Brandon swaggered into the dining room, already mid-text on his phone. Smells expensive, he joked, sliding into his seat. What's the occasion? Just celebrating, Grace replied evenly, pouring wine into her crystal glasses. A small milestone. Jenna looked up from her plate, mildly curious. What milestone, Mom? Grace smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Oh, just something personal. I've been reassessing things. Brandon, shoveling food into his mouth, didn't notice the edge in her tone. As long as it doesn't involve cutting off your little gifts to us. This house doesn't pay for itself, you know. Grace's fingers tightened slightly around her wine glass. Funny you should mention that, she said. I was thinking about ownership lately. Who really pays for what? Brandon paused. His fork hovered. What are you talking about? You'll see, Grace replied, setting down her glass. Sooner than you think. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Jenna tried to cut the tension with a joke, but even she sensed something was different about her mother. That night, Brandon complained to Jenna in hushed whispers. Your mom's been acting weird lately. Creepy even. Like she knows something. Jenna, brushing her hair in the bathroom mirror, sighed. She's just old. Maybe she's having a senior moment. But Brandon wasn't convinced. Something in Grace's eyes had unsettled him. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't sleep well that night. Downstairs, Grace sat in her living room with a pen and legal pad. The documents from Ethan, her lawyer, were ready for signing in the morning. But before she put pen to paper, she scribbled a note at the top. Dinner was delicious. Revenge will be even sweeter. The next morning began like any other. Brandon dragged himself out of bed, brewed coffee he didn't intend to share, and scrolled his phone while ignoring Jenna's rambling about a neighborhood fundraiser. The doorbell rang just as he was taking his first sip. "Get that, would you?" he called lazily to Grace, who was already up and tending to her garden. Grace didn't reply. Instead, she continued pruning her roses, a serene smile on her face. The bell rang again. Brandon grunted and opened the door to find a man in a crisp suit and a courier hat. "Delivery for Mr. Brandon Keller." "That's me. What is it?" The man handed over a thick envelope and had Brandon's sign on a digital pad. Without waiting for questions, the courier turned and left. Brandon shut the door and ripped open the envelope. Inside was a notice of eviction. He blinked. It was printed on heavy paper, signed and notarized, bearing the seal of Grace's attorney, Ethan Cromwell Askew. Effective immediately, your tenancy in the residence located at 2846 Hillcrest Drive is hereby terminated. You are to vacate the premises within 30 days or be subject to legal removal under state tenant laws. Brandon's face turned crimson. What the hell is this? He stormed into the kitchen where Grace stood calmly sipping tea. "You evicted me?" Grace didn't look up. "No, Brandon. I evicted a man who stole from me, who disrespected my home, who made my retirement a living hell." Jenna walked in, her face already pale with confusion. "What's going on?" Brandon threw the letter at her. "Your mother is kicking us out." Grace folded her napkin slowly and finally looked up. "No, Jenna. I'm asking you to grow up. You let him drain my account, ignored my pleas, and treated me like a burden. I gave you every chance. Now I'm taking back what's mine." Jenna's lips trembled. But we have nowhere to go." Grace raised an eyebrow. "You had somewhere before you came here, didn't you? Maybe it's time you remembered how to stand on your own." Brandon's voice cracked. "You can't just do this." "Legally I can, and I already have. You have 30 days. Be grateful I gave you that." As Grace left the room, Brandon slumped into a chair, the eviction notice fluttering to the floor. And for the first time, he realized he wasn't in control anymore. Brandon tried to keep up appearances at first. He walked around town in his tailored blazers, pretending nothing had changed. But people noticed. The confident doctor who once dropped $500 on a bottle of wine now quietly declined dinner invites. Grace didn't need to gloat. Her silence was enough. Meanwhile, the 30-day notice Grace served wasn't just legal. It was a ticking time bomb. Brandon and Alyssa scrambled to find another place to stay, but with Brandon's medical license under review due to suspected financial misconduct, thanks to Grace's lawyer flagging suspicious tax behavior, no one wanted to rent to them. The best they could do? A cramped two-bedroom apartment above a pawn shop with water stains on the ceiling and paper-thin walls. When they moved out, Grace stood on the porch sipping tea, her dog Daisy by her side. Brandon couldn't meet her eyes. Alyssa cried quietly, pulling her rolling suitcase behind her like a child being punished. That evening, Grace poured herself a glass of wine and walked through her now quiet home. She opened the guest room and took in the emptiness. Peace, real peace, had returned. But she wasn't done yet. Brandon still owed her money. And now he'd be paying her monthly, with interest. 3 weeks after Brandon and Alyssa moved into their rundown apartment, Grace got a message. It was from Brandon. "Grace, I know this is awkward, but I was wondering if you still have that rental unit behind your house? The one your cousin used to live in? Alyssa's having trouble sleeping here and we're struggling a bit." Grace let the message sit for 2 days. Then she replied, "Yes, it's available. $2,100 a month. 1 month's rent plus a $3,000 security deposit. Tenancy agreement required. No pets. Late payments incur a 10% penalty. Let me know if you're interested." She could practically hear Brandon choking on his pride. 2 days later he responded, We'll take it. Can we move in next week? Grace didn't smile, but her spine straightened with satisfaction. She forwarded the lease agreement, sent by her lawyer, and requested digital signatures. She also included an itemized list of terms. No noise after 9 p.m., no guests beyond 3 nights, all utilities billed separately. A final clause allowed Grace to inspect the property once a month, with 24-hour notice. Brandon signed. When they moved into the back unit, Grace watched from her window, invisible behind the curtains. Alyssa wouldn't even look at the house. Now, the man who drained her savings walked past her flower garden each morning and paid her on the first of every month, like clockwork. She deposited each check with a satisfied flick of her wrist. Justice didn't always come in loud courtroom victories. Sometimes it came with rent payments and silence. Brandon never could blend in quietly. Even as a tenant, he strutted around the neighborhood as if he still owned the block. It didn't take long before the HOA president, Marjorie Whitcomb, received complaints. Lawn clippings dumped on common property. Loud music after 10 p.m. A parking dispute with the Ramos family 2 doors down. Grace watched the drama unfold like a soap opera she didn't have to subscribe to. But the real shocker came when Marjorie scheduled a private meeting with her. "Grace," she began over tea on Grace's porch, "I know it's none of my business, but Brandon applied to be on the HOA board." Grace blinked. Then she laughed so hard she had to put her cup down. "You're kidding." "I wish I was," Marjorie replied, deadpan. "But it gets better. He listed your house as his permanent residence." That was the final straw. Grace provided Marjorie with the official lease, clarifying Brandon was a tenant only, and a rule-breaking one at that. Marjorie grinned. "I thought so. He's been trying to boss folks around like he runs the AITA. We're revoking his application. But just so you know, we've opened an investigation into a couple of things he claimed on the form. His job title, for instance." Grace raised an eyebrow. "His job title?" "He wrote, financial consultant, self-employed. But when we looked into it, well, let's just say we found some discrepancies." Grace nodded slowly. "Do what you need to do. He's made a career out of lies." By the end of the month, Brandon's name was blacklisted by the HOA, his parking privileges suspended, and an audit from the local Chamber of Commerce had begun. Karma wasn't just knocking, it was launching a full campaign. Grace hadn't seen her daughter alone in months. Alyssa always came with excuses: work, the kids, migraines. But one Wednesday morning, she showed up at Grace's door with no warning. Alyssa looked tired. Not just physically, but soul-deep exhausted. "Mom," she whispered, "I need to talk." Grace stood still. Her heart wanted to open wide. Her memory slammed on the brakes. "I'll put on some tea," she said calmly. They sat in silence until Alyssa finally broke down. "It wasn't all Brandon," she said. "I let him into your accounts. I signed the bank forms. I told him where your investments were." Grace said nothing. She simply stared. Alyssa continued, tears falling. "I didn't think he'd drain it. He said you wouldn't notice, that it was just temporary, that we were starting a business that would pay you back tenfold." Grace clenched her jaw. "And when it failed?" she asked. "He said it was your fault for not helping earlier, that you owed us because you had more than you needed." Grace stood. "Did you believe him?" Alyssa looked away. "I did, for a while, until he started hiding things from me too." Grace handed her a tissue. "So what now?" "I'm divorcing him. I've started the paperwork." "I'm sorry, Mom. I was stupid and greedy. I miss you. I miss the kids having their grandmother." Grace was quiet. She didn't forgive immediately, but she didn't slam the door either. "Apologies are words," she said. "Let's see what your actions say." The divorce was anything but smooth. Brandon refused to let go. He painted Alyssa as an unfit mother, leveraging every dollar he had to fight dirty. But Grace, now well-versed in Brandon's patterns, hired a private investigator on Alyssa's behalf. It took less than 2 weeks to uncover Brandon's shell company scams, fake client reviews, and the paper trail of funds funneled through shady platforms. The court didn't just rule in Alyssa's favor. It issued an emergency order limiting Brandon's visitation. Grace watched it unfold from the back of the courtroom. Her hands never trembled. She didn't gloat. But inside, her heart beat steady. A drum of justice finally served. 2 months later, a sign appeared in front of Grace's house. For sale. Not because she was leaving. No. It was Brandon's new rental that was going up for grabs. Turns out he'd violated too many HOA rules, and the property management company pulled the lease. With nowhere else to go, Brandon ended up couch surfing. Grace never offered a spot. Instead, she focused on rebuilding her relationship with Alyssa and the grandkids. She started a small financial literacy podcast called Gracefully Informed, aimed at helping other seniors spot red flags in family finances. It went viral. 1 year later, Grace was invited to speak at a national elder empowerment summit. Her story, once hidden behind closed doors, became a source of hope, resilience, and redemption. Brandon, he was last seen trying to peddle crypto courses online, now living in a rented basement, paying monthly court-ordered restitution. Alyssa rebuilt herself slowly. The kids visited their grandma every week. And Grace, well, she sat on her porch each evening with a glass of wine, watching the sun dip below the horizon. She didn't need revenge. She got something better. Peace. Like this story, if you felt Grace's quiet revenge was the best kind. Sure. If someone you know needs to be warned about family betrayal. And don't forget to subscribe to Savage Senior Stories for more spine-tingling, heart-healing tales of justice and grit.